Hello, this is from Caracas and I am Ray Gomez. During the polls that took place in Venezuela last Sunday, Nicolás Maduro was re-elected as president of the Bolivarian Republic. On this, I will talk with Ignacio Ramonet, editor-in-chief of the Le Monde Diplomatique. Please join us for the next few minutes.
How do you do, Professor?
How are you, Ray? Pleased to be with you.
Thanks for accepting our invitation. Well, the news of the week. There were elections in Venezuela, and Nicolás Maduro was re-elected president of the Bolivarian Republic. What is your opinion, let's say, as an entry?
As an entry, we could say, Ray, that first, it was fulfilled what the main polls indicated. But we also have to confirm that the elections took place. There were many threats against the elections, foreign powers.
Internal and external threats.
Especially external, and in particular, external power did not hesitate to insist in pressuring, to threaten the Venezuelan government if it organized these elections, promising a series of sanctions if it did so. Despite that, the election took place. Second, we can say that the elections to which several candidates attended, in any case, 4 important candidates, were developed with total normality. I mean, the electoral campaign.
You were here for several days, and you had the possibility, perhaps, to visit some polling places, to walk on the streets of Caracas at least.
Yes, right. Last Sunday, I visited a score of polls in various areas of the city. In popular areas, in middle-class areas, in high-class areas, and I've seen how everything went on normally. But I also want to say that I'm here since the end of the last week, and I have seen on television the interventions of the different candidates, their statements, their campaign closing rallies. In all this, the candidates have been able to walk around the whole country freely developing their election campaign. The opposition press has held some candidates, and of course, right-wing opposition, the traditional opposition, regrouped within the Bureau of Unity. It announced, asked, demanded that its constituents would not go to vote.
What do you think of the role of the MONDE? The MONDE, which apparently has not learned the lesson of 2005, when it also withdrew from an election process and lost positions in
We
parliament.
thought that they had learned the lesson because they passed a whole mandate, a whole legislature, without participating in the National Assembly and concluded that it had been a mistake. It is worth more to participate and try to advance their ideas, more or less, with
You need to
greater or
respect the
lesser
democratic
efficacy,
order.
democratically, but also with possibilities, because you can always change a law, as the opposition do in all the countries of the world, right? And yet, here they have again repeated the error, claiming now, when the date of the elections resulted from an agreement, the agreement of Santo
Right, the
Domingo,
national dialogue.
the national dialogue. They wanted them later in the year, in October. The government wanted them sooner, on March approximately. And an agreement was reached on the April 20 or April 19th.
postponed.
And then, with the opposition postponed to May, then it is the result of an agreement. But they did not
An
respect
agreement that at the last moment, just the representatives of the opposition decided not to sign.
not signing when everything had been negotiated, when the president himself had already given his agreement. Then the opposition indeed said, in a surprising way, and according to the information we have, undisputably there was also pressure of foreign powers on the opposition to not participate.
Who did not agree with the elections in Venezuela beyond the borders of this South American country?
Well, first, it didn't suit all the enemies of the Bolivarian Revolution. It did not suit the United States, which has a Venezuelan obsession for quite some time. President Obama already had it,
Hugo Chavez?
and this president
How
has
you mean
it
the President of the United States, Obama?
even more exacerbated, if we can say so. And also some Latin American countries that do not want the Venezuelan example to be disseminated
They don't want it
by
to be
Latin America.
multiplied.
They have been fighting against it for 20 years.
No, there is a reality. I repeat, there were elections, there was a winner in the elections, and there were even results. To what extent do you think it was that call for abstention?
Well, it must have been a bit because, let's say, the participation is not without being the lowest. There are two lower than
Yes.
this in the recent elections. It wasn't the biggest participation. Therefore, unarguably, the slogan has been followed by a part of the electorate. But it does not invalidate the legitimacy of the elections because globally, half of the electoral body, half of the 20 million voters have participated. And that is much more than we see in many countries. Recently, there have been
42% share rate. And so if we mention
also in the
Donald
United
Trump in
States.
2016 went with a 46% and the share rate was 54%.
Of course, I mean, they had that argument. Yesterday afternoon, I was consulting some great newspapers, the websites of some great newspapers in Latin America, which already titled 90% abstention. For example, El Clarín, a great Argentinian newspaper. It titled as the main news, 90% abstention in Venezuela, when the data had not been yet given. For example, the New Herald in Miami titled 70% abstention. If there had been that degree of abstention, if it had been a problem, we're talking 48%, fully certified by the National Electoral Council for observers, 2,000 international election specialist observers. It is undisputable, therefore, that they have been left with that argument, but does not have the figure that would give value to that argument. 48% represents half of the electoral census.
You're right.
Therefore, it's quite valid.
That's right. As such, despite this rate of abstention, I would also like to reflect with you on the gap left by the candidate and now re-elected President Nicolás Maduro, the rest of the
Really,
candidates.
Ray, I think it has been one of the surprises of the night. The polls gave, most of the polls, there were some exceptions, but most of the polls gave Maduro winner. But the difference with the second, with Henry Falcón, was a difference of 10 points, between 5 and 10 points. They seldom gave 20 points, when in reality there has been a difference of 40 points.
You're right.
More than 40 points. Then the
Jorge
difference...
Rodriguez, excuse me, the campaign manager, the head of a campaign commune to which candidate Nicolás Maduro belongs, said that by adding the votes of the three opposition candidates who competed in this contest, President Maduro left them a gap of 3 million to his advantage.
Yes, I mean, there's been a result that goes far beyond that we imagined. It must also be said that there are difficulties in the country. The economic war, the financial war, the prevarication in terms of food, of medicines, that has created many difficulties in the country. That is normal. It would be normal for people to say, in a country, the person responsible is the government. It is not going well, it is the government. And then they want to sanction it. It hasn't happened. There is surely a part of
That could be
abstention,
translated
yes,
as a punishment vote.
as a punishment vote, but it's much smaller than one could think. And therefore, the president has had the addition of most of his constituents.
Why is that?
Well, I think first of all, it's very interesting that you have gotten 68, 67.
67.7.
Any president of the Venezuelan Republic has obtained a result in percentage, not in votes, a percentage higher than the obtained by Hugo Chavez. In itself, it's a huge achievement. I think it's due to the fact that in these 6 years, people have known Nicolás Maduro
Has Nicolás
way
Maduro
better.
earned his trade as a politician?
Evidently, and above all, they have known as a person, as a great humanist, a person very close to society, a person thinking and protecting the people, a person who faced a multitude of attacks, has had a lot of ideas. Then there were those riots that he left without repression for months. 4 months lasted, and well, when he imagined the National Constituent Assembly, when he imagined the Carnet de la Patria, when he imagined the clap, so that poor families were not penalized by the economic war of food, when he managed the movement Somos Venezuela, well, maintain social investment so important. 70% of the budget goes to social investment. Has distributed
Even
2
having a
million
barrel of
homes.
oil at very low prices at international level.
Absolutely, Ray. A barrel of oil that came to cost about $20. Fortunately, that is already going up, and for Venezuela it's already around $70. And also must say that, for example, also created retirement,
pension system.
giving attention to all retirees. Is something unique in Latin America, despite all these difficulties. I think this has made the electorate popular, because Chavism is sociological. Then the popular electorate does know how Nicolás Maduro well and adheres to him, because it was Chavez's slogan before, when it was in 2013,
The
we obey
revolutionary
Chavez.
task that they said.
Of course, the task, well, now they know him and over him. This is a major structural change. We are in Chavism, but now we know that there is another important leader, and it is called Nicolás Maduro, in circumstances that are almost more difficult than that of Commander Chavez.
We are reflecting on the personality of President Nicolás Maduro, but I would also like to reflect on the state in which the other candidates who were measured in this race are left. Let's start with Henry Falcón.
Well, Henry Falcón has had a really irrational behavior, because what did seem coherent is that he participated in the elections. Defying the bureau, yes, he was part of the bureau, breaks with it and participate. He had been head of the campaign of Capriles in the previous election. Then he participates because, indeed, speculates on the idea, there are difficulties in the country, there will be a profitability for the one who opposes the President Maduro, and well, so far is coherent. Makes his campaign, makes it freely, and does not complain during the whole campaign, and last Sunday, at the time that the vote is ending, then he makes a statement saying that the elections are not legitimate. I think that there behaves in an irrational way because, in short, accepting the result at the time when he makes his statement, the result is unknown. He does not know how much he will get, may suspect, but it is important to know that the government needs an opposition. Falcón can embody that opposition. A counterpart is important in the political life, because it's a real opponent, so that would have been constructive. I do not understand his political rationality, and frankly it is a shame, because the country and the Chavism had always needed an opposition, but a constructive opposition, an opposition that thinks that there are problems in the country and that we have to fix them, proposes a plan, the government has another, are discussed, and the electors elect. So, as far for the second, well, he made a statement in which he distrusted the result, and we can say, since he said that there was a very small difference, he would denounce it. But if there was a big difference, he would not denounce.
Bertucci was deflated because the most recent polls gave him even above Henry Falcón.
They gave him over 15, right?
Some today, Bertucci and Mena, who were in second place, nevertheless, his results were very under Nicolás Maduro's, not only Maduro's, but also Henry Falcón. What happened to him?
Well, I think the first search that should be made, and it's interesting, is that for the first time in the political spectrum of Venezuela appears an evangelist party. It is a well-known Latin American phenomenon in Brazil, Peru, Costa Rica. Recently, in the second round, there was an evangelist candidate in Guatemala. Political evangelists have been a phenomenon for 20-30 years in Latin America. It wasn't known here because essentially of the sociological character of the Chavism. Chavism is the expression of the most model social categories, and those that have the hope that Chavism will give them an answer.
And he also reunited those social sectors.
Probably the crisis that the country lives has left a series of disinherited from Chavism, who now cling to the almost spiritual promise made by the pastor Bertucci, and obviously that has allowed him to create a political space where this perspective did not exist. It is also possible that the project of Bertucci is rather a project to, without being offensive, of commercial type to create its own clientele, to establish like the most important evangelical church of Venezuela and to give it a visibility. Here is the Catholic episcopate that it has a very negative political role, also very conservative.
By the way, they also called to abstention.
And that also called to abstention, contrary to what the Pope said yesterday in his statement that he blessed Venezuela and I wish a peaceful election. Then I think Bertucci has its duality. He has created an evangelist party where it did not exist. He has created space where it did not exist, and probably that is for the moment his greatest ambition.
Let's go now to the international scenario, something we were talking at the beginning of the interview. Could we say that the reactions are bifurcated? A significant number of countries sympathize with the re-election of Nicolás Maduro, but the number of countries reject the groups, you said, in the self-styled Group of Lima. They don't recognize these elections since a few weeks ago, and the United States will even meet what it accomplished, make harder sanctions. How will Nicolás Maduro face things from now on, considering this situation in the international scenario?
There is no doubt of what the opponents of this revolution have promised. They have promised sanctions if the elections had place, and they have already begun to execute them. The 14 countries of the Lima Group have already called for consultations with their ambassadors, which lowers the level of diplomatics, threatening some kind of sanction as far as refugees are concerned. People who emigrate from Venezuela. Then the tension with some neighbors can increase in some degrees. The United States had made statements saying already a certain number of threats. We are less than 24 hours from the outcome of the elections. One of the main threats that will not allow Venezuela to pay the debt or the debt payment circuits, which can create embargo problems. Venezuela goods abroad. They are practicing preventing Venezuela from buying abroad medicines, food, paralyze the money that Venezuela takes from the country to buy. The Venezuelan chancellor explained the other day that in Europe there are 5.2 billion euros immobilized. Frozen. They were destined to buy medicines and are missing in the country. Then it says there is a humanitarian situation. Then there is a great cynicism of this. And now we are waiting for the new train of sanctions that the United States should announce in the next days, and probably also the sanctions of the European Union.
How does the EU react in this scenario?
I think that, unfortunately, it will align itself on the United States in parts. It will align itself on the United States, either lowering the level of diplomatic relation, either by adding to some measures financial sanctions. We do not see at this time the EU sufficient autonomy. Should have it. Especially that Trump has had a very hostile behavior, declaring a trade war, especially the economic leader of the European Union, that is Germany. But my feeling is that the EU is going to align above all that the Spanish government is also part of the leaders of this offensive against Venezuela, and then we are going to see something that has not been seen in a long time. That is to see a whole reactionary alliance.
to which Canada is added that began to apply sanctions by prohibiting the Venezuelan residents in Canadian territory to exercise their right to vote, which is a human right.
It is a human right. It is a political right. And the reproach that they make to the government at one time was not to organize elections. I do not see why one can prevent that someone freely, especially in Canada. Nobody will oblige a Venezuelan living in Canada to vote according to a way or another in Venezuelan territory, because it is the interior of the consulates of the Embassy of Canada. It has been a really absurd measure that reveals above all these kinds of obsession that some governments have with Venezuela, and in particular with the government of President Maduro.
In spite of that, what's the image of the Bolivarian government in the international scenario? That, as we said earlier, there are countries that promise and are already developing a package of sanctions against Venezuela, but there are others that shake their hands.
Of course, Venezuela has many friends. We could mention some countries that are not moco de pavo, as we say in Spain. There is Russia, China, India, Iran, Turkey. There are many Latin American countries. There are many African countries, many Asian countries. Let's not forget that Venezuela, until recent years, presided over the non-aligned. Therefore, Venezuela has hundreds of friendly countries. This coalition will react against Venezuela. It's a group of countries that does not pass of the 35 countries in the world. There are almost 1,200 of states. Then, but I also say, Ray, that last Sunday, this election day was so peaceful, so normal, without the slightest problem, without the slightest violence. When they are developing elections in very close countries like Colombia or Mexico, where every day a candidate is murdered, they told us that in Mexico there are more than 120 candidates killed, and the elections are in July. Unfortunately, in the near months, there may be many more dead people. Here there has not been this incident.
At the same time, the pre-electoral context that is being lived in Colombia as the assassination to social and political leaders in face of the elections in this May the 27th.
Without talking about what happened in Honduras, where there was a monstrous fraud, and there were also numbers of victims for protesting fraud, a fraud denounced by the OAS.
That's correct.
Then I mean that this in some way has had to impress the adversaries themselves, because they have seen that nothing has happened, that everything has been developed with the utmost tranquility, and the different candidates, the millions of voters of the opposition, have voted without any problem, and their votes have been posted. Then I also believe that Venezuela has given the world an image of democracy functioning peacefully, that total freedom and in peace, this should impress a little to those chancellors that oppose this government.
Professor Ramonet, thank you very much for your opinions in our program from Caracas.
Thank you very much, Ray. See you soon.
See you soon.
Well, on the election of Nicolás Maduro as the president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, I have been talking with Professor Ignacio Ramonet, editor-in-chief of Le Monde Diplomatique. Thank you for joining us. This is from Caracas. I am Ray Gomez.